The Galactic Council had seen countless species rise and fall over the centuries. It was a place of power, where empires brokered peace, traded territories, and swore alliances. Yet, amidst the well-dressed bureaucrats and the shadowed plots, one thing remained constant: a sense of order, a belief that everything could be controlled. That is, until the humans arrived. When Earth was first invited to join the Galactic Council, many scoffed. The humans were young, their technology a mere shadow of the ancient civilizations that surrounded them. Their weapons were crude, their military small compared to the vast fleets of the Empire or the technologically superior races that dominated the galaxy. But what they lacked in power they made up for in something else: a quiet, unsettling presence. The first few years were nothing remarkable. Humans said little, did little. They attended meetings, signed treaties, and offered assistance where it was needed. But there was an air about them. They never acted in haste, never seemed to panic. In a room full of proud, arrogant species, they remained calm. This calm, however, was deceptive. It made the others underestimate them. The first cracks in the facade of the Galactic Council began when the human diplomat entered the chamber for the first time. He was nothing spectacular to look at, an average man by most standards. He wore the standard human attire, nothing that would draw attention. Yet, as he entered, the room fell silent. Not because of any grand gesture or commanding presence, but because of something far subtler. He wasn't standing tall, nor was he seated with an air of authority. He simply sat, his posture unremarkable, his expression unreadable. But the silence he brought with him was something more. The first time the Empire made a subtle threat against Earth's territory, it was ignored. The humans didn't retaliate, didn't respond in any dramatic way. They did nothing at all, just continued to exist in their unassuming way. The Empire's diplomats found this maddening. Their arrogance told them that a species so young, so seemingly insignificant, would bow to the power of their empire. They were wrong. The human diplomat sat in the same unassuming position, making no effort to speak or to defend. The Empire laughed it off at first, dismissing his silence as weakness. But as weeks passed, that silence became unsettling. No one in the room could ignore him. Every time they looked at him, they felt small. He wasn't a threat, not in the traditional sense. But there was something about the way he did not engage that made the Empire's officials uneasy. When they made their claims of superiority, he said nothing. When they delivered ultimatums, he did not flinch. And yet, they felt the weight of his presence in ways they could not explain. It wasn't just the diplomats who noticed. The entire council started to feel it. Whispers began to circulate among the smaller species. The ones who had no stake in the power struggles but felt the tension in the air. They noticed that whenever the human diplomat was present, things had a way of going wrong for the Empire. Trade routes went silent. Communications were cut. Fleet movements were mysteriously delayed. No one could tie it to the human diplomat directly, but the pattern was undeniable. Every time he sat there, things went wrong for the Empire. One of the strangest incidents happened after a particularly tense session when the Empire's representative had issued a series of sanctions against Earth. The human diplomat, as usual, said nothing. The room grew cold, and for reasons no one could explain, the Empire's representative began to stutter during his speech. His words became garbled, his sentences incoherent. He stumbled, tripped over his own tongue, and ended up collapsing into his chair, visibly shaken. The room, stunned by the spectacle, erupted into whispers. Had the human said something? Had he threatened the representative? No. He simply sat there, unmoving. It was the silence that had done it. The utter calm in the face of such obvious hostility had made the Empire's representative crack under the pressure. No one knew what to make of it, but from that point on, the room was never the same when the human diplomat was present. Weeks turned to months, and the Empire's behavior became more erratic. They sent messages to Earth, hoping to provoke some kind of response, any response. But the humans remained as silent as ever. When the Empire demanded answers, the diplomat simply looked at them with the same detached, impassive gaze. No one ever confronted him. No one ever dared. The more the Empire attempted to assert dominance, the more the Council began to question their own actions. They had long prided themselves on being able to manipulate the smaller species, to bend them to their will with power and coercion. Yet here was a species, a mere fledgling among the stars, that did not bow, did not respond to threats. They simply were. And that fact alone was beginning to unnerve the entire Council. A shift began to take place. Those who had once dismissed Earth's position began to question the motives behind their indifference. The silence was no longer perceived as weakness. It was something more, something they could not place their finger on, but something that felt dangerous nonetheless. The other species in the Council began to take note of the shift in power. They started to pull back from their support of the Empire, unwilling to stake their futures on a galactic power that had become erratic and unpredictable. The Empire's arrogance, once a driving force, began to fracture. Rumors circulated that Earth's true power lay not in their military might, though it was growing rapidly, but in their ability to remain untouched by the petty squabbles of the galaxy. The human diplomat, ever silent, had become a symbol of this power. He wasn't just a representative. He was a living reminder that the galaxy's order could be shattered by nothing more than the quiet refusal to engage. And then, one day, the Empire pushed too far. A new threat was issued. Earth would face sanctions unless they capitulated to the will of the Empire. They demanded resources, technology, and access to Earth's most valuable asset. The Council braced for the usual response: a bombastic speech, a fiery defense, or perhaps a surrender. What they got, instead, was the same silence. The human diplomat didn't rise to speak. He didn't even acknowledge the Empire's threats. He simply sat there, as still and calm as ever. But this time, something was different. The very air seemed to grow heavy. The Empire's representatives began to shift in their seat. The room grew colder, the atmosphere more oppressive. Some of the smaller species began to leave, visibly shaken. The Empire's ambassador looked at the diplomat, his expression tense, and for the first time, he found himself lost for words. The silence had become too much. The power of the human presence, never outwardly aggressive, was more than the Empire could bear. And then, without warning, the Empire's envoy, a high-ranking general, stood up and addressed the Council. "We made a mistake," he said, his voice trembling. The room fell silent again, but this time it was out of fear. The Empire, once proud and unyielding, had broken. They had been reduced to pleading for mercy from a species that had not once raised its voice in anger. The other representatives watched in stunned silence, realizing something they had never truly understood before. The Empire's surrender in front of the Council had sent a tremor through every seat of power in the galaxy. What was once unthinkable had become undeniable. The humans hadn't just resisted pressure, they'd turned the Galactic Empire into a shadow of its former self without lifting a weapon. That moment marked a turning point, but it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something larger, something no one fully understood yet. Not even the humans. After the Empire's plea for mercy, questions spread like wildfire. What else were the humans hiding? What kind of species could drive the largest galactic power into submission by simply existing? Dozens of intelligence agencies scrambled to dig into Earth's history, behavior, military files, anything they could get their claws, tendrils, or implants on. The results only added to the growing fear. Humanity had been in over 1,000 minor conflicts across the stars in just 2 decades. They didn't start them. They didn't always respond with military force. But when they did act, they ended things quickly, decisively, and without warning. Battles that should have dragged on for years concluded in hours. Fleets disappeared. Stations were found abandoned, life support still active, but every enemy either vanished or turned themselves in days later, babbling incoherently about the look they'd seen. Those who had fought humans directly never described tactics or weapons. They spoke of silence, precision, a terrifying patience, and when they were rescued, if they were rescued, they refused to fight again. The Council tried to reassert order. They passed resolutions, tried to mend their fractured image by praising Earth's restraint. But everyone could tell, Earth wasn't playing their game. They had sat through the Council's chaos, watched the old powers tear themselves apart with arrogance and overreach, and now, they had everyone's attention. Without ever declaring themselves a superpower, they had become one. The smaller civilizations were the first to shift allegiances. Where once they would have offered tributes or soldiers to the Empire, they now sent envoys to Earth, hoping for quiet partnerships. Trade routes were renegotiated. Fleets moved out of old patrol lanes and closer to Earth's colonies, not as a show of force but as a sign of deference. These changes weren't prompted by Earth. Earth hadn't asked for allies. They hadn't demanded a place of leadership. They hadn't asked for anything, and that terrified the galaxy even more, because Earth's strength didn't come from want. It came from capability. In a remote system, a group of warlords attempted to test Earth's boundaries. They intercepted a human science vessel, took the crew hostage, and broadcasted their demands across neutral channels. They expected negotiation, maybe even retaliation. What they got was silence. No response from Earth. No movement in their borders. Not a single ship launched. Days passed. The warlords grew bolder, taunting Earth, threatening executions. Still nothing. On the 7th day, all communication from the warlords stopped. Their station went dark. Their fleet's transponders blinked out. No one had seen any ships arrive. No logs showed entry or exit from human space. And then, without announcement, the hostages returned. All of them, unharmed. Their ship landed in the nearest Council neutral zone station with no sign of how they had gotten there. They said nothing. They couldn't. The survivors of that mission stared into the distance, unblinking. When asked what had happened, they simply whispered, "They were already there." The phrase echoed through the Council. No one knew what it meant, but the effect was clear. Border disputes vanished. Raids stopped. Smuggling into Earth's territory plummeted to zero. No one dared test Earth again. It wasn't out of respect, it was out of something much colder. The Empire tried to recover. Their leaders held press conferences, made speeches, restructured their fleet. But they couldn't stop the bleeding. Worlds that had once feared the wrath of the Empire now feared the silence of Earth. And even those who had benefited under the old order started asking questions. Why had they followed the Empire for so long? What had they truly gained? The answer, increasingly, was nothing. The Empire offered them fear. Earth offered them quiet stability. And that was enough. A second shift came from within the Council. A motion was proposed to grant Earth permanent emergency veto power. It passed without debate. No one wanted to find out what would happen if Earth didn't like the next decision. It wasn't a gesture of diplomacy, it was survival instinct. One counselor, representing a militaristic species known for breaking lesser races into submission, attempted to mock the vote. He laughed during the session, declared Earth's silence a bluff. He suggested that if humanity truly had such power, they should show it. That moment would be his last on record. The next day, his entire planetary fleet vanished. All satellites were offline. Their moon base disintegrated. When the Council demanded answers, Earth denied involvement. Quietly, unemotionally. They didn't even issue a formal statement. But when a Council observer visited the ruins, they found one thing intact. A single, unarmed human drone hovering silently among the wreckage. It didn't broadcast anything. It didn't move. It didn't need to. The message had been delivered. The rest of the Council understood. This was not warfare. This was message-driven deterrence. Earth didn't shout. They whispered with action. And somehow, that whisper was louder than the loudest superweapon. Some species tried to adapt. They began emulating Earth's behavior. They trained diplomats to remain calm, practiced silence in negotiations, tried to hide their emotions behind neutral expressions. But it never worked, because silence, without strength behind it, was just passivity. And Earth had earned its silence. It wasn't an act. It was a reflection of their certainty. Across the galaxy, entire education systems restructured their curriculums to include Earth studies. Not because of a mandate but because of necessity. Understanding humans was no longer optional, it was critical for survival. What began as diplomatic profiling turned into cultural immersion. Alien children learned Earth's history. They read human literature. They debated ethics using human philosophy. Not because Earth demanded it, but because everyone wanted to understand how such a young species had outmaneuvered the oldest powers of the stars with nothing but presence. One incident on a council-linked trade hub revealed just how far things had gone. A merchant insulted a human trader in a minor dispute over cargo space. The insult was crude, personal, and witnessed by dozens. The human didn't respond. He simply logged the complaint and left. 3 days later, that merchant's license was revoked. His ship impounded. His family quietly relocated for their safety. No one claimed responsibility. The council denied involvement. Earth never made a statement. The trader simply returned the next cycle and resumed business. The message, again, had been delivered. That pattern repeated again and again. Earth never initiated conflict. They didn't send warnings. But things happened. Inescapable consequences followed any attack on Earth or its people. And the galaxy began to learn. The absence of noise was not peace, it was the countdown to consequences. Even Earth's silence began to take on structure. Patterns emerged. When a human diplomat paused before answering, it meant policy was about to change. When Earth declined to comment on an incident, investigations elsewhere suddenly accelerated. When Earth accepted a delegation, their enemies were often destabilized days later, without human involvement. It wasn't just presence anymore. It was architecture. Earth's stillness had become the scaffolding of a new galactic order. Species that once resisted began competing not to challenge humanity, but to impress them. It became common for ambassadors to brag about which human idioms their colonies had adopted, or how many Earth-standard protocols their navies followed. The deeper motive was survival, but the surface-level obsession turned into genuine imitation. Entire diplomatic schools reshaped their courses around Terran conduct. Embassies mimicked Earth's architecture. Some worlds went further, adopting human legal frameworks, media systems, even timekeeping. This imitation wasn't celebrated by Earth. It wasn't even acknowledged. That only made it spread faster. Earth's refusal to validate it made validation feel earned, not given. And when Earth did speak, it wasn't loud. One brief nod from a human envoy sent star systems into euphoric declarations of alliance. What terrified old powers most was how easy it was. Earth had no central plan, no imperial ambition, no doctrine of galactic destiny. But when a crisis unfolded in a resource-rich system caught between two economic blocks, Earth resolved it in a single day, without a ship, without a shot. Both blocks simply agreed to Earth's terms before Earth had even sent the final offer. Neither side knew what would happen if they didn't. And no one wanted to find out. That fear reached its peak when an ancient sleeper fleet, buried since the old cycle, activated from beyond the mapped galaxy. Hundreds of dreadnoughts, a civilization long believed extinct. They re-entered known space without communication, without warning. They destroyed a station within hours and sent a transmission to the Council that consisted of a single phrase: "We have returned to reclaim." Panic followed. The Council scrambled, empires repositioned fleets, and theories flooded every channel. But Earth didn't panic. They didn't assemble an armada or call for war. They sent a single freighter-class ship, unarmed, slow, and unremarkable, into the last known vector of the ancient fleet. Everyone watched, expecting it to be torn apart. Instead, the fleet stopped. Not slowed. Not maneuvered. Stopped. Then, silence. For 3 days, no signals. Then, the dreadnoughts turned. Not toward the Council. Not toward Earth. Away from everything. Deeper into the void. As they vanished, they transmitted one final message. Acknowledged. Nothing more. The Council demanded an explanation. Earth gave none. When pressed, the human diplomat responded with a single sentence. They understood. That was all. From that moment, Earth was no longer viewed as a participant. They were the context. Wars didn't begin unless Earth ignored them. Trade didn't flourish unless Earth permitted it. Peace didn't last unless Earth supported it. No one declared Earth's authority. No one voted for it. But reality had shifted around them. Even time began to bend toward humanity. The most advanced quantum cartographers realigned star maps to Earth's calendar. Once a standard reserved for local Earth systems, it was now used for interstellar treaty coordination. It was practical, some said. Efficient. But everyone knew it was something else. It was adaptation through inevitability. The tipping point arrived during the signing of the Accord of Mutual Continuance, a document meant to unify the last 5 major powers who still held illusions of parity with Earth. Negotiations had stalled for weeks. Debates over phrasing, clauses, enforcement. Nothing moved forward. Then the human representative, silent for the entire process, placed a small, handwritten note on the table. 3 lines. The contents were never made public. The signatories all agreed to the final draft the next morning. One of them later resigned, stating only, "We'd forgotten who we were negotiating with." Whispers spread about the note. Some believed it was a threat. Others, a prophecy. One rumor suggested it was a reminder of something the signatories had all witnessed but promised never to speak of. Whatever the truth, the note went back into the human diplomat's pocket. It was never seen again. Earth's reputation hardened into something close to legend. Their territory, though small compared to the empires of old, became a place no one entered without invitation. Not because of borders, because of reverence. Pilgrims arrived from distant sectors seeking to understand the human way. Not the military, not the politics, but the mindset, the restraint, the discipline that came with unchallenged capability. Some tried to mimic it. A rising power attempted to form a new union of species based on Earth's principles, led by non-human leadership. It lasted 6 months. Infighting, betrayal, collapsing economies. Earth said nothing. When the union dissolved, its surviving leaders sent a final message to Earth, asking for guidance. Earth responded with a simple phrase: "We listened. You did not." That message became doctrine. Entire philosophical schools across alien civilizations began debating the meaning of Earth's statement. Was it literal? Symbolic? A moral code? Theologians built religions around Terran silence. Artists replicated the expressionless human face as a symbol of cosmic equilibrium. It reached absurdity, and yet Earth still said nothing. That silence only made it spread faster. Eventually, the Council was no longer recognizable. The seats were the same. The systems still transmitted vote. But all eyes rested on the quiet figure who spoke once, maybe twice a year. And when he did, his words weren't just binding, they were prophecy. At the Council's 1000th meeting, a junior representative asked the question no one dared to say aloud. Why does Earth remain silent? You have power. Why not lead openly? The chamber froze. For once, the human stood. He looked around, gazed steady, then spoke. Because those who crave power can't be trusted with it. We have enough. He sat. And with that, the meeting ended early. No votes cast. No objections raised. Just the quiet reshuffling of chairs as species reconsidered their place in the galaxy. That moment became the historical fulcrum scholars would later label as the end of the galactic era and the beginning of the Terran consensus. A period not ruled by war or fear or wealth, but by a presence that never sought power yet became the axis around which power turned. And still, Earth expanded slowly, carefully, never claiming, never dominating, just existing. And in doing so, rewriting everything, their diplomat remained. Same posture, same quiet, same steady hands folded in front of him. And across the stars, every empire, every council, every leader waited not for conquest, not for command, but for the moment when Earth would finally stand again. Because they knew that when humanity spoke next, it would be not to shape the galaxy. It would be to decide what comes after it.